So why do we educate? What are our aims when we educate? What are the deepest principles that inform and regulate what we do when we educate? What are we attending or intending to achieve when we educate? Now, the second theoretical tool that I want to work with is a tool that helps you to think through the regulative principles that deeply inform why we do education. Now, to understand a regulative principle, what I want to try and do is I want to do two things. I firstly want to give some very basic rules as to how you would recognize informing regulative principle at the heart of education. The second thing I want to do is I want to show you how these informing principles, these regulative principles, come into either deep conflict with other regulative principles or find ways to work together and harmonize. And as a theorist of education, you really need to grapple with the fact that different people from different cultures or even from different personality types tend to come at education from very different philosophical principles. And this results in a situation where there can be deep antagonism between people. So let's start off with what a regulative principle is. And really what I'd like to do there is I'd like to show you three different rules of thumb or three different identifying criteria you can use to work out if something is a regulative principle or not. Now, the first criteria which I'd like to introduce you to is what Boltanski and Thevenot, the two guys I'm working from over here, what they call common humanity. And that is, if you have a deep principle, it has to speak to everyone. You can't have a deep principle in education which only speaks to a certain minority or a certain majority within the education field. Everyone gets educated, and a principle must speak to everyone, especially a deeply informing regulative principle in education. You can't have a situation where you say right up from the beginning, hey, this principle works for some but not for others. So really, when you look for a deep principle, it firstly has to speak to all of us. And it has to say that all of us have something in common. We are all the same in a certain kind of way. We all have a common humanity, as it were. So, for example, if someone's working from like a highly creative regulative principle, what they're going to have to make a claim for is that everyone, deep down in their hearts, is creative. Everyone wants to be creative. There's something about creativity which is similar and common to all of us. Now, we all know, however, as teachers and as human beings, that even though there could be something common to all of us, some people definitely have either more of it, or they use it better, or somehow they rise higher in use of it. And there's a situation in a regulative principle where you can't deny the fact that some people, for example, are more creative than others. We might all be creative deep down in our hearts, but some people embody and reach the higher principles of creativity more than others. So what you have to do there is you have to have a second kind of rule of thumb, where what you do is you start to talk about what Boltanski and Thevenot call common dignity. And that is that even though we all have got some kind of access into that regulative principle, some people tend in those situations to reach higher levels than others. Even though we can all access all states, some of us tend to access the states more than others. And those that do access the higher states, well, their order of worth is higher. They've managed to get to a position where they've invested more, and in terms of that regulating principle, they are recognized more. Now, to get that high, it really means, and you can see how I've done it with the triangles, you can see that to get to the highest point in the triangle, which few people get to, so it's the pinnacle of the triangle, to do that you have to invest more and more and more to get there. So low cost to get you the basics of creativity, high cost if you want to reach the highest levels of creativity and sacrifice everything else in pursuit of that goal. So the second rule of thumb to recognize a regulating principle is to say, does it have within itself criteria to recognize lower levels of what that principle is from higher levels of that principle? And does it recognize what you have to do to go from the lower levels to the higher levels? What practices do you have to perform to get there? Now, once we have those two basic principles, we then have to use a third rule of thumb, and this is the principle which really points to it being important for everyone. And that is the argument that whether you have basic levels of the principle, like basic levels of creativity, or really high levels of creativity, really the key point is that creativity as a guiding principle is good for everyone. Whether you're at the top, whether you're at the bottom, whether you've got only reached basic levels or whether you've reached high levels, a creative world is a better world for everyone. It results in a world where you have dynamism, you have difference, you have discoveries, you have a more exciting, rich world. And when those discoveries and those innovations, for example, are made, it benefits everyone. So there you can hear the basic rules of thumb for recognizing what a regulative principle is in education. It has to be a principle which applies to everyone. It has to have criteria within itself which recognize low and high levels of that regulative principle. You then got to have practices which get you from the lower to the higher levels, and then you have to make a claim that it's not just good for the people who reach the highest levels, it's good for everyone, no matter who you are. Now, once we have those three basic criteria to recognize a regulative principle, what we can do is we can start to elaborate different theoretical or different regulative principles and show how they work and what they do.